Today, we're taking a look at America's role in World War I, but maybe not in the way you'd expect. Because this story isn't just about the trenches in Europe. It's a tale that unfolds on three distinct fronts, right here at home, across the ocean on the battlefield, and against a totally invisible enemy. So let's start with a really important question. We all think of World War I as this brutal, muddy, industrial war. And it was. But what if the fight that took the most lives wasn't against soldiers with guns? What if it was against something else entirely? Just keep that idea in your back pocket as we get started. So first, we have to rewind a bit. We've got to understand where America's head was at before the country decided to jump into the fight. And for a long time, the official stance was neutrality. But, it was complicated. I mean, for most people in America in 1914, the war was just someone else's problem. It was this distant thing happening over in Europe. What everyone was talking about were things happening right here at home, the progressive era, all these intense social and political reforms. Things like women's suffrage, labor rights, that's what mattered. The fighting in Europe, it felt like it was on another planet. Okay, so America's officially neutral, right? Well, not so fast, because this is where what we say runs into what we do. Just look at the money. By 1916, our trade with the Allies had literally tripled, and our trade with Germany and the Central Powers, it basically disappeared. So in reality, the United States was the bank and the factory for the Allied war effort, long before we ever sent a single soldier. So then, when America did officially enter the war in 1917, it kicked off this massive, massive change back home. And this was the second front of the war. The government went into overdrive to get everyone on board. President Wilson created this thing called the Committee on Public Information, and they used every trick in the book to sell the war to the American people. They even got the brand new Hollywood movie industry involved in making propaganda. And it wasn't just about winning hearts and minds, it was about cash, pushing everyone to buy war bonds through massive Liberty loan drives. And this was the story they were selling. It wasn't just a war, it was this grand, noble crusade. The narrative was that America was riding in to rescue civilization itself from these evil forces of, and I quote, medievalism and militarism. I mean, that is some seriously powerful stuff. But all that patriotic fever, it had a really dark side. See, there were a lot of German immigrants in the US, and suddenly suspicion was everywhere. Groups like the American Protective League popped up, and get this, it was basically 250,000 private citizens working with the government, spying on their neighbors, trying to find German sympathizers or anyone who was against the war. So you end up with this wild split personality on the home front. On the one hand, you have all these celebrated acts of patriotism, public rallies, buying bonds. But on the other hand, the government passed the Espionage and Sedition Acts, which pretty much made it illegal to speak out against the war. People were thrown in jail, and immigrants and unions became easy targets. It was a really contradictory time. Okay, so let's shift gears now and head over to the third front, the actual battlefields of Europe, because the arrival of American troops was about to change absolutely everything. For the Allies, things were looking bad. In 1917, Russia dropped out of the war because of its revolution. That meant Germany could move a ton of soldiers over to the Western Front for one last giant push in the spring of 1918. And it almost worked. But then, 2 million fresh American troops arrived, and they joined the counterattack that summer. The tide just completely turned, and only a few months later, it was all over. And hey, you don't have to take my word for it. The German commander himself, General Ludendorff, called the day that American-backed offensive started the Black Day of the German Army. He knew the game was up. The sheer number of American soldiers was the final nail in the coffin for Germany's war plans. But right when victory on the battlefield seemed like a sure thing, that invisible enemy we talked about at the very beginning showed up, and it came from the very heart of the war machine itself. It started quietly in the spring of 1918 in a rural county in Kansas, a new flu virus. From there, it got to Camp Funston, a gigantic army base. And you see what happens, right? The very system designed to win the war, packing men from all over the country into camps, then onto crowded ships to Europe, it became the perfect superspreader event. And once the virus got to France, it mutated into something way, way deadlier. The numbers are just mind-blowing. In the US Army, for every soldier who went to the hospital for a battle wound, more than 2 were hospitalized for the flu. It was a plague. For the average American soldier, this silent virus was a much bigger threat than German bullets. In fact, more of them died from disease than were ever killed in combat.
And by the way, you've probably heard it called the Spanish flu. Well, that's not exactly fair. It only got that name because Spain was neutral in the war. So while all the countries that were fighting were censoring the news about the pandemic to keep morale up, Spain's newspapers were reporting on it freely. So the world just started calling it the Spanish flu.
So let's try to pull all of this together. Let's try to really understand the true, staggering cost of this war, which, as we've seen, goes so far beyond the battlefield. The United States lost over 100,000 soldiers in the war. A terrible, terrible price. And remember, more than half of those deaths weren't from battle. They were from disease. But as awful as that was, you have to put it in perspective. Look at what Europe went through. France lost almost 1.5 million soldiers. That was about 4% of their entire population. Germany's losses were even higher. It's almost impossible to wrap your head around that scale of loss. And then there's this number. An estimated 50 million people worldwide. That's how many died from the influenza pandemic, a plague that was spread and made worse by the war itself. That number just completely dwarfs the number of soldiers killed in the war. It's not even close. Which brings us back to that final thought. A war isn't just fought on a battlefield. It's fought on the home front. It's fought in people's minds. And sometimes it's fought against an enemy you can't even see. So when you add up all the lost lives, the lost liberties, the division, and the plagues that follow, how do you ever really count the true cost of a war?